Ursula von der Leyen said the quiet part out loud the other day as she compared elements of free speech to a virus in an address to the EU. The president of the EU said that Europe needs societal immunity around information manipulation because research has shown that pre-bunking is much more successful than debunking. To discuss this, we needed to find someone who really knows their free speech onions, maybe someone who'd presented a show called Free Speech Union for a couple of years. So please welcome back, and a big round of applause, to Andrew Doyle!
Thanks for having me, Josh. Really appreciate it.
How are you, Andrew? How's life in America?
Yeah, at the moment, America is delightful. It's all very nice, and you're doing a fantastic job, obviously. I keep giving you jobs. That's basically all I do these days.
That is it, exactly. Do I detect an American accent there? No. No. You've changed,
Howdy.
man.
Sure. No, I'm not going native. Absolutely not.
So, well, I want to talk a bit more about what America's like in a second, but let's talk about this particular story. So she was talking specifically about misinformation here and not necessarily speech in general. At least that's what they're saying. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I thought it was a really chilling speech. I mean, you mentioned in your introduction that Ursula von der Leyen used the phrase pre-bunking. I suppose I should just clarify. Ursula von der Leyen, you know, she's decided that she's going to do this speech at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit. She says that she's introducing a European democracy shield, which sounds very, very dramatic. But let's not forget that Ursula von der Leyen is head of the EU Commission. That's the executive branch of the EU that's responsible for proposing and implementing new laws. But she wasn't elected. So the idea of her using the phrase democracy in anything is, you know, it's not very convincing, is it? So she's talking about effectively controlling speech for the sake of democracy. How often have we heard that before? Basically, every dictator in history has said a similar thing. But she's come up with this idea. She uses an analogy in this speech where she says that specifically disinformation is a kind of virus, and that what you need to do is inoculate yourself from disinformation, not with better information or correct information, not by debunking false information, but by pre-bunking. So she's invented this phrase pre-bunking, which basically sounds like every other aspect of the autocrat's lexicon throughout history. You know, phrases like thought crime or pre-crime, you know, it's right up there with those sorts of phrases. Pre-bunking just means censorship. What she's saying is free speech, and that includes speech that's incorrect, speech that's wrong. Free speech is a kind of virus, and the remedy for that virus is pre-bunking or censorship. That's what she's talking about here. Let's be really clear about it.
Well, one of the worst things about you going away, Andrew, is that now I'm having to actually read stuff. And
I know, sorry about that.
I know, but reading into this, it seems like they're saying that it all comes down to the EU's greatest fear being populism, as we've seen in various elections that have been taking place. The argument would go, of course, rather than censorship, maybe they should start dealing with the actual concerns of the population, of the voters.
Yeah, but they can't do that, can they? I mean, we saw that the other week when J.D. Vance was giving his speech in Munich to the security conference, and he made that point. He said to these leaders in Europe that you can't be scared of your own electorate. You have to listen to the concerns of the people who put you in power. And, you know, the guy who introduced him to the stage ended up in tears. They were talking afterwards about how disappointing. People have been saying how ugly it was. I mean, he was 100% right. And in any civilized and sensible and liberal society, you would have people on the left and the right saying, actually, of course, he's got a point. You know, for too long, we've had these technocrats in Europe who effectively think that they know best. They'll do their uttermost to run roughshod over the decisions made by the people. They'll smear it as populism. You always, with that phrase populism, is always used with a bit of a sneer, isn't it? And they'll always say that the people got it wrong. I mean, the EU is a very good example. I know you're a bit of a fan, but let me just say the EU is not a democratic organisation. Ursula von der Leyen, as I say, is not elected. The EU Commission has all these powers which it really, really shouldn't have, because you can't get rid of them. You can't vote these bureaucrats out. Let's not forget that the EU has a history of rerunning elections when the people get it wrong, right? Continually doing that. It happened with Ireland, happened with Denmark. The Lisbon Treaty of 2008, Irish people voted the wrong way. They said, no, do it again. They just slapped them down, said, do it again. Let's get the right result. They did it in Greece as well. This is not a democratic organisation, but they have incredible power, particularly when it comes to legislation, but also, of course, when it comes to online speech. And that's their big big target at the moment. They're effectively saying that they need to monitor social media companies and say that we need to crack down on what people can say because they're scared of disinformation. Well, that's just a phrase that people use when someone's presenting an opinion that doesn't run with their narrative. You know, the idea that anyone in power has the ability to decide what is correct and what is false. We know that's not true because the elites have been wrong about all sorts of things for a long, long time, not least in recent history. You know, there was a time just a couple of years ago when the lab leak theory at Wuhan was considered a racist conspiracy theory, and epidemiologists and anyone, in fact, who said that it might have something in it were booted off social media, were censored. Turns out they're almost certainly correct. So you can't trust the people in charge to decide what's disinformation, what's truth, what's fiction. They're not in a position to do that because they get it wrong more than most.
So have you seen any examples so far of this pre-bunking or any legislation that they are going to be putting in place to implement this?
Well, they've been trying to do it for years, and they've been trying to, you know, every sort of member state in the EU is on board with this, it seems. In the UK, of course, our government is basically saying that Ofcom should have control over the internet. So much so that Jim Jordan in the House of Congress wrote to Keir Starmer just last week and said that the Committee for Judiciary is going to be assessing. They've actually subpoenaed, I think, 8 social media companies in the US and said, we need to see any communication you've had with the UK government. Those documents are going to be coming out over the next few weeks and few months. And we're going to be seeing that people in the UK government and the EU have been putting pressure on various social media companies to say, you've got to censor on our behalf. And of course, the social media companies, if there are huge financial ramifications for that, they're just going to censor everything. They're going to censor and think about it later. They're going to be overly cautious. It's going to be really bad for the marketplace of ideas. So what you've got now, essentially, is America, with its new government, really promoting the idea of free speech. You've got Europe with this very anti-free speech position, and those two are clashing. I mean, you saw in the Oval Office the other day, didn't you, Keir Starmer sitting there with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump and JD Vance made the point that free speech is in a terrible state in the UK. They didn't say it quite like that. That's how I would have said it, but they said it in a sort of mealy-mouthed way. And Keir Starmer said, I just have to say I'm very proud of the history of free speech in the UK. Well, I'm very proud of the history of free speech in the UK. I'm really proud of the history of common law and the idea of standing up for people's right to say whatever they want. And, you know, John Milton and John Stuart Mill, etc. But let's not pretend that Keir Starmer is any fan of free speech. He is fully behind the online safety bill, which, by the way, was introduced by the Tories. So let's not forget, this isn't a right or left issue. He's just accelerating what the Tories already gave him. So it's a really bad situation. And there's going to be this conflict, I think, now between the EU, between the UK government and the US. They have completely different worldviews on this. The idea that the US seems to be espousing now is let people speak. The best solution to bad speech is more speech. The best solution to incorrect and factually incorrect speech is to provide correct information. But the elites of Europe believe that the masses can't be trusted with false information, that they just vote mindlessly like drones according to what some Russian bots tell them. That's why the election in Romania was overturned. You know, they think that people are that stupid. In the UK, we heard it for ages, didn't we? People voted for Brexit because of Russian bots. People voted for Brexit because of a slogan that was on the side of a bus. And that's not true. There were months and months and months of rigorous debate. The people of the UK had never been so energized. It was the largest political mandate in history. And still they say, yeah, but these little kids, the great unwashed, the electorate, they don't really know what they mean. Let's try and overturn their decision. We need a whole new system of government. We need to think about government as being servants of the people, of the demos. We need to get that back again. And free speech is going to be the front line. Free speech is going to be the battleground. And I'm afraid at the moment in the UK and in the EU, we are definitely losing that battle.
Well, when you say Sir Keir Starmer talking about he's proud of the history of free speech, he didn't say the present of free speech.
No, he's
he's
got a legal background, hasn't he? He's a lawyer, so
yeah,
that makes sense.
It sounds like you got out of the UK just about the right time then. And what do the Americans think of us over here, and certainly in terms of free speech? When you meet them and you say, "Oh, I'm British," do they go, "Oh God, you must be so happy to be able to say what you want"? That's one of my famous accents.
I really want people in the UK to understand how mental they think we are. Like anyone over here from the left, from the right, across the board, they think it is absolutely crazy that people are going to prison for memes and tweets and social media posts. They think it's crazy that we have non-crime hate incidents that the police are recording. The fact that the police will knock on your door if you criticize a Labour councillor, whatever it might be. They think it's nuts, and it's not a partisan issue. I really need to emphasize this. They have their First Amendment. And the reason why, I think, or one of the major reasons why Kamala Harris was so trounced, is because the Democrats have been edging towards this idea of amending the First Amendment so it doesn't include what they call hate speech. You know, you had Tim Walz in the vice presidential debate saying that hate speech isn't covered by the First Amendment. Well, yes, it is. Hateful speech is covered in free speech. And also you've had John Kerry, of course, John Kerry saying that disinformation, that the First Amendment was a major block when it comes to dealing with disinformation. So every time the American ruling class push back against free speech, they get punished at the ballot box, and they get punished by their own side as well. And that's why, from an American perspective, the UK is inexplicable. They do not understand how it can be that the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, can stand there and effectively put pressure on the judiciary to lock people up for a long, long time, to release actual criminals, rapists, killers, whatever, to make space in our overcrowded prison system for someone who's posted a meme. And yes, some of the things that were posted are horrible. Some of the things that were posted are objectionable and deserve criticism, robust criticism. But the idea that you should silence people who say horrible things is a fundamental flaw in anyone's argument who believes in liberty, because free speech protections aren't there for the people who say the nice, fluffy things. Those protections are there for those people who say the horrible things, the controversial things. And every now and then you'll get horrible trolls, just abusive people who are going to use that free speech to say those horrible things. And then every now and then you get a Galileo who's saying a really uncomfortable truth and ends up under house arrest for being 100% right. So you have to be very careful about free speech. It's not about the things that the people say and whether they're objectionable or not. The point is the principle. The principle is bigger than any statement than any individual can make. The principle is not whether the meme that this person posted and is now in prison for was offensive. The principle is whether, we should, as a society, be relinquishing the bedrock of our democracy, which is free speech. It's that value that underpins every other freedom we have. The Americans understand this. The Brits and the Europeans do not.
Well, Andrew, I miss you so much. I think that we can say, though, that you are going to be appearing on the channel more now, which is obviously amazing for us. And thank you so much for joining us. And I hope America's working out brilliant for you. Andrew Doyle, everybody. Lots of fans. Next.